Hey, Maddie, what do you think about computer science majors?
I think a lot about them, Michelle. Basically, it is the overarching force in college admissions right now. I'd say about roughly half of our students every year are applying computer science. So I think a lot of things about them. Today, we're going to be going over what I think about them and how it's shaped the college admission landscape in general. So, Michelle, have you heard of computer science?
I would say yes. It's hard not to have heard of that.
All my friends, I live in the Bay Area. Growing up, basically leaving college, I was an English major. My friends were liberal arts guys. I get home and 23 and I started to make new friends and get into competitive video games. And it's going to shock you that all the dudes I met playing competitive games in the Bay Area in around like 2013ish were computer scientists. They were programmers. And I'll be talking about them because they've kind of influenced my view on the subject matter. But the key is they were all really successful too. You know, it was like a bunch of
Hmm.
smart, nerdy guys like me that were all doing significantly better than I was, let's say career wise at the age of 23. And because of that, computer science, like I knew a lot about it. Like I would listen to talk about it. That then led to me getting into college consulting in 2019, which was suddenly I got a double dose of it. That I now, after spending the last 5 years learning about like how great it is. Like my friends seem very happy with their jobs. They had good hours. They were making a lot more money than I was. I'm now working with every 17-year-old on the planet, and they all seem to want computer science.
Right.
And I could kind of break those students down into two groups. Like half of them really seemed into it and in like in a genuine way. And the other half, I'm not going to say that they're being forced to do it because look, they kind of were. Like their parents like definitely had a
Hmm.
hand in it, but I'm not going to say that they hated it. That's been often the case. Yeah, they weren't miserable, but it seemed closer that they didn't really have like a genuine passion that they care that much about, and this made sense for a lot of like logical reasons, and they were willing to put the work in to get there.
Right.
And that's mostly held true, I suppose, in like the 5 years since, including I think the students you've had. I'd say it's probably more like, yeah, I'd say it's about a 50-50 split.
Hmm.
Like that's the students who do computer science. It's half that are really crazy passionate about it, and half they think it's okay, but like it's a career path. But it is a huge topic. Like the fact that we have you nod your head at like yes, all the computer sciences. Like I would say the fact that we have around I'd say about 10ish students a year, and at least half of those are going to be doing some sort of computer science, data science, maybe one engineering, which you can kind of throw in, and then maybe one or two other STEM like advanced mathematics.
Right.
Those like engineering and mathematics, it's a lot of the same trends. Although this is really specifically about computer science. I think it's kind of its own thing. But it's every step along the way, like it is very much a core aspect of what we do, which is why we're going to talk about it. So first, I'm going to discuss like the history of computer science undergraduate degrees. So according to Google, the first U.S. computer science degree was offered at Purdue in 1963, and doing my limited research on it, the history very much just matches the history of computers in America
Hmm.
because computers showed up, well, I guess like around in the 60s. The degree was relatively niche until the early 2000s. But then I have a chart here that basically showcases the number of bachelor degrees in computer science between 1995 and 2021. And it basically starts here at 95 and fairly niche degree. We're talking about 22 to 25,000 students. Then there's a very, very slow gradual rise about till about 40,000 graduates in 2000. That's when basically I would say the real computer you were there, Michelle. You remember 2000? Yeah, like that's when computers
Yep.
became a big thing. The is actually probably more complicated people think. Then there is continued rise to 60,000 graduates around 2004. But then what's interesting is it actually tapers off, which surprised me. Between '04 and 2010, it actually goes back down to 40,000 graduates. And I spent some time
Really?
figuring out why this is. And there's going to be a weird kind of timeline situation here where whenever we talk about like graduates, you have to think about what was happening 4 years prior or 5 years prior. 'Cause that's when they're actually kind of
Okay.
getting ready for college. And well, 4 or 5 years before 2005 was the dot com crash, which
Right.
was
Okay.
the other collapse of the U.S. economy that I was alive for. That's
Yeah.
to this day real. The other time that everything was messed up, and that seems to be attributed to what was slowly but surely gaining steam kind of fell off because it's like, well, all the dot coms crash, there's no money in anymore, right?
Right.
So like that was probably why it went back down. But that gets us to 2010ish, which is right around near the bottom. But then 2011, 2012, like I say 2012 is kind of the birth of kind of this process because 4 years before that is the U.S. economy crash,
Right.
the big one, yes, the really
Mhm.
big one. Yeah. And this is conjecture, but my memory of that crash is that before 2008, you had two options if you wanted to be like a high achieving student who didn't necessarily like have a dream path. One was doctor, and the other was lawyer.
Mhm.
And you remember the latter? Like those really were the two options, and lawyer was like I was considering being a lawyer because I liked writing, it was like I don't really know what I want to do. But then during the '08 recession, there were basically too many lawyers because a lot of financial
Right.
lawyers, and it was true. Like during college, I spent I graduated high school in '09, so I'm basically in college during the recession. And all you would read is like, "Don't be a lawyer. It's the worst job ever. You'll die. You'll hate it. You won't get a job."
Mhm.
And I clearly remember just constant alerts, like never be a lawyer. I went, oh, okay, I won't be a lawyer. I won't be a lawyer. And I'm sure I can find another choice where the number of lawyers went down significantly. But I believe that around the same time, you had the massive rise of technology, and that's probably what defines the 2010s is this unbelievable boom of technology around the world for all different sorts of reasons, even more in the 2000s. And that's what this chart is basically mirroring is the steady but then dramatic rise of computer science because between 2010 and 2015 we gained 20,000 graduates again. But then 2015 to 2020, it doubles. So it goes to
Whoa, okay.
100,000. Yep. And this chart runs off at 2021, but I can see no reason that the blue line just continues on exactly the way it's going, which
Right.
probably puts us more like 125, 130,000. So that still is like 130,000 degree is a lot. It's still about like 5% of graduates, I think I found. So it's not like computer science has taken over the world, although it sure
Mhm.
seems like it.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, so, like, this is not I yes, that also surprised me, however, well, we're in a bubble of, like, elite college admissions, and it I would say around 50% of students wanna do computer science, probably about 40%, and then another 10 to 20% wanna do another STEM adjacent major,
Right.
and I see that year after year after year, and I have pretty much going back to 2019 when I was working at a college firm, so, yeah, I guess the future of this is it doesn't seem like it's gonna be stopping, although this chart that's probably for a later episode. I don't know. Like I currently think that this isn't going anywhere.
Mhm.
So I have here this is something I've said before. Computer science is a virus that has infected college admissions. So I think if you just ask them, most deans or academics would be like, computer science is great. It's a new realm of exploration. I think schools hate computer science. I think they do. Like
Really?
I think they wish it never existed. Yeah, because well, it's a virus. Like, I think they
Mhm.
would agree. I think virus would make sense to them that it has impacted and mostly negatively affected every aspect of what they stand for, and they've had to play. So the what is the this is not a Michelle. Do you know what the ethos of college admissions is?
Mm-mm. I don't think so.
Does the term interdisciplinary studies mean anything to you?
Yeah, that's kind of like, I guess, a well-rounded education.
Yeah. So to be fair, it took me like 3 years to learn what college was actually for. Like doing this job, I had been in college for 4 years, and then I spent 3 or 4 years doing it before. And to be fair, I only learned it because I had to figure out how to get kids into these schools. Like, what do these schools want? It's like, well,
Right.
they want what they stand for. And so undergraduate education in particular is not about mastery of any core subject. Like this is the general ethos of college education. And maybe some people disagree, but you can go where I learned this. If you can go read the book Excellent Sheep, there's basically I is like a how-to guide of how to get into schools because he's a former Yale professor who just waxes poetic about what Yale should be. And the
Mm.
entire time I was halfway between like, okay, boomer, like college isn't eighty
Yeah.
thousand dollars, college isn't 12 grand a year like it was when you were going, but also being like, oh, this is the slop that these people want. And I definitely was a much more cynical person about the college process when I was reading this, and like I called it slop, and I still pretty much do. However, I've come to kind of understand it better and appreciate it, and I agree. Like this does make sense to me in a way that as I've figured it out and gotten students in under this using this very ethos, I've begun to soften on how cynical or not it is. So that the ethos of college admissions, what it is that college is where you learn to learn.
Okay.
And the basic premise is that you do not go into an undergraduate education expecting, yeah, the job out of it. And that instead, and you don't, and it's not to learn a particular subject. Like
Mhm.
it's the ethos states like the reason you pick a major. That's the key of it. Is like you don't go to a college with a major selected in theory. Instead, you generally do like generalized classes. You take a math course, you take a history course, you take a science course, and it's through that you begin to well, you bask in like the higher education of itself. And again, it's a
Right.
real good essay. This guy stretched into an entire book, and boy, does that guy like say some stuff. But actually, the essay is about how stressed out and miserable kids are in high school.
Oh, okay.
And like, yeah, the first third of that book, I was like, I actually thought it was quite well done because it was unfortunate because like we work with a lot of stressed out high schoolers, and
Yeah,
often not like I would say they're not miserable, but you could tell that this process grinds on them in a
that's
way
true.
that is understandable. But I've often found it's really easy as soon as they do get into Duke or Yale, and you're like, oh my god, we did it, woo, woo,"
Yeah.
and then you're like, okay, have fun, and something like a flaw I've often seen with college admissions or like, going to college is that is the finish line. But when we both know it's not at
Right.
all, and there's always been a little back of my head where it's like, is this kid really going to be happy and have all their dreams come true now they're going to Yale? Like no.
Exactly,
And
yeah.
the first third of this book is essentially that guy confirming as a college professor, like no, as I say, your skeletons fly with you. And I
Mhm.
knew I knew deep down that was the case, but actually reading a guy talk about it in a way that made sense to me, like it was pretty powerful. And I was like, all right, then there's another like three-quarters of it where the guy just waxes poetic about what college should be. I'm like, all right, boomer. Like, okay, okay. Like that's my review of excellent sheep. It's the first quarter is really quite well done. The back three-quarters could have been an email kind of thing. But in it, he basically goes over that. He goes, right, is you learn to learn, and it's not just that. Like yes, and part of it is you are figuring out like maybe you like history, maybe you like science, you never
Mhm.
really been exposed to it in that way. But more so, you are learning like the style of learning that is at the ethos of college education. Yes, you are becoming a student, a learner in a grander sense. Then basically the major you pick is kind of on the back end. Is like after 2.5, 3 years, you then are able to select something that you want to do with your life in theory, or you want to learn more about. But that really only includes, like going your last year and a half, you really focus down on it. Like that is kind of the mindset that then prepares you for what comes after. You need to
Right.
enter the workforce. You need to, or you go to grad school, and that's really the idea.
Mhm.
Is that like if you really care about math or science or health or anything like that, well, then you end up in grad school for it, and that is what that is for.
Right.
To become a anything, you need to go to graduate school that's dedicated towards it. Well, undergraduate education is the step that gets you both there. Like, no, it's the high school of that. Like
Mhm.
that is basically the idea. And yeah, I think something like that, like it makes sense to me, right? Like I think that's kind of nice, and like that is kind of what like college should maybe be.
Yeah, like
Um,
exploration.
but then came along computer science, Michelle,
Mhm.
and let's talk about why computer science isn't like other majors. One, instead of being a cornerstone of other subjects, is instead a culmination of them. AKA has very little overlap with other academic subjects. So, like interdisciplinary studies, there are part of this that math's kind of weird, but like literature and history and philosophy and science, there is overlap between them is natural and congruent. That by becoming a better understander of, yeah, like if you better understand the history of the 16th century France, you should better be able to understand the type of scientific inventions that came from that period. Stuff
Right.
like that. By better understanding the mathematical formulas that went into Galileo's arc around the planet, you could better understand how he got lost or what happened. That one's not as good. The first one was better, but that is what education is to me. That's also why that's the kind of stuff I love having students write about in their application. Is like it's
Mhm.
like I took this subject and repurposed it to learn this new thing. And that's also why
Right.
that's like essays that work. Like that's the strat. Like that is interdisciplinary. And but computer science is more of an end game. I say here that computer science is much closer to a trade than it is a core academic subject, and I think
Yeah.
that is at the root of where a lot of the problems pop up. That computer science, like learning computer science, doesn't teach you shit about history, and you don't really need to know that much about history to learn computer. It's not like learning about 16th century France makes you a better computer scientist. And like
Yeah, that's
computer
true.
science wasn't around until the 1960s, and it wasn't really prevalent until like the last 20 years. It's a very modern, new subject matter entirely. Yeah, it's a trade. Like you use computer science to make stuff. It doesn't quite fit in with everything else. It's also the idea that yeah, like math and history and philosophy and chemistry and biology, these have all been around for hundreds of years. These are
Mhm.
all established and they certainly do adapt the sciences, but not that much, you know. Like atoms are atoms, and calculus is calculus.
Right.
That is why that there's a stability in these different majors that I think makes them much easier and universal to kind of play around with. Computer science, every year it's different, right?
Mhm.
It's a constantly evolving world, which is why, again, say it's more like a trade. It's like plumbing or pipe fitting, where there's definitely gonna be tools which you are gonna be more universal, but even toilets existed a lot longer than computers. You know, so another aspect of it that makes it different is a 4-year undergraduate CS degree is usually good enough to enter the workforce inherently for
True.
that process. And that there's no other major that really quite offers it. Like engineering a little bit, right? Maybe math a
Mhm.
little bit, but those are again like STEM tangential. But yeah, is every other degree you either they're not that important in the first place, like liberal arts, you know, no, like English
Yeah.
major, where you're just going to go into the work. Either like my English major was I want to be a writer, but I don't have a writing degree. Like in theory, I was supposed to get an MFA. However, I
Mhm.
just like no, I don't want to do that. But most degrees, you're either supposed to, as mentioned, like go to grad school for. Like I was supposed to get an MFA until I realized that was stupid. Or you're supposed to basically use the skills you learn in college. The fact that I'm an English major should it's like I was in marketing for 7 years.
Right.
That's kind of the other process is that the fact that I have an English degree makes me hireable insofar as I have a collection of skill sets that might be desirable by these companies. And even in those cases, like only kinda, you know, it was like
Mhm.
that. Because that's college isn't to get a job, just like Excellent Sheep told me. It's to learn for $80,000 a year. Well, computer science shows up, and yeah, like you can get advanced degrees in CS, but it seems like the market itself has decided that a 22-year-old who has a 4-year degree from, presumably a solid school and knows what they're doing, that is enough. And then the last one of why it makes it different is that college or computer science is approachable in a way other majors aren't at a high level. Then, and I see this both at the
Hmm.
college level and I see this at the high school level. Your average like dedicated 15-year-old can do high level computer science work and actually build things and
Right, that's
hackathons and all
true.
stuff. Whereas that just doesn't quite like there is itself kind of an age cap and an experience cap on a lot of experiences. I feel kind of lucky. Like in theory, writing doesn't have that problem, and I did when I was in high school. I was able to write for stuff, but it's not the same. Like
Mhm.
there weren't dedicated summer camps I could go to that had me building websites and everything, and that gets more into like the admissions part. But like you just see how it's so different. It is
Totally, yeah.
and all of this has really evolved over the last I'd say 25 years, and that's what makes it a virus because viruses move quickly. And this is all in direct comparison to like before computer science, like not much change in the college game. You know, like you look at what a college was offering or thinking in 1895 versus 1995, it's not that different. Like, the subjects were
Mhm.
similar, the mindset was similar. The cost was like similar-ish, I think. I don't think it was like $1 billion yet.
Right.
Schools weren't built to handle computer science. And that is the best way I can describe it, is that it goes against the ethos of college itself. Like it's just its own thing. In theory, like I think colleges, if they could do it again, they wouldn't even want computer science. Like it's not their deal. I refer to it as a trade, and the same reason you can't go to college to learn
Mhm.
how to be an electrician or be a pipe fitter or clean pools for a living or whatever. Work X-ray machines. Like I bet they'd appreciate it if instead you had to go to a dedicated CS school.
Right.
However, computer science, like it does it like it is like a it's too damn popular for that. Like they couldn't get away with it, and they offered it going back to as early as the '60s, and it's just always kind of sitting there.
Mhm.
It's like they had the resources, but it was fairly, as mentioned, fairly niche, and that's what leads to the story of my buddies. They go to school in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, like me. Well, like computer science was not hot in the streets. It was a very different time, and like they
Yeah.
did it because they like computers, just the same way that there's a lot of probably more niche undergraduate degrees, I don't know, like sports communications or whatever. There's tons of
Mhm.
majors in colleges that I don't even really know about because I don't tend to send students to there. Like I have to like no, just do philosophy if you want to do that. But schools are always branching out and offering new options. Just somehow like this is the one of possibly hundreds of weird like tiny things schools have offered that exploded in popularity due to the nature of technology itself becoming so prevalent and so important. And like that, I think everything we talked about is like this is a virus, and that these schools like all these different factors. It's not necessarily to any one thing. Is like, but all this comes together that leads to where we currently have, which is the end result of all this is schools have had to radically adjust their internal policies to adjust to a newfound world. And you've been in this game with me for about 3 years. I've been in it for six. And over those 6 years, well, we've had quite a bit of moving in college admissions. COVID was probably the biggest one, just in general.
Right.
There was the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action. There was
Mhm.
the college admission scandal with Stanford and
Yeah.
USC. That was the beginning. There were presidents being forced to resign due to inappropriate comments on Israel Palestine. I would say those are the five big news stories that have rocked college admissions in some way that I've noticed. Oh, and test optional. I thought of two more. One is that yeah, legacy admissions. Although that I wouldn't. That one is not. That one is that's happened. That has not changed my day to day or our day to day life with students. Is what I would say about it. But like it has been a big issue. And then test optional. That was the other one.
Ah, okay.
Computer science has easily dwarfed all of those probably combined as far as how far much has influenced and shifted throughout my 6 years. That every year, one of the defining notes is like how computer science is new this year, like what's new in the game, and like how does that change things. That has because it's so popular. I've half my
Yeah.
students interested in it, and just as technology continues to evolve, and so does like this year. Well, there's been a downturn, and people. I will actually include this. You can there's a viral post about how no one from Berkeley is getting a degree anymore. Like, no one with
Mhm.
a degree, right? That post, like stuff like that, rocks the world, honestly, because and it rocks my version of it, which is working with teenagers who are doing this. Like I'm have had and I'm going to be having conversations with students this entire year about how CS isn't the like you take a 6 week boot camp and suddenly you're working for Elon Musk joke that it was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Like the speed that CS itself evolves and how important it is, like that directly impacts you and I and our ability to do our jobs and what we do. But then we have like that's just me. That's just us, the college consultants. When you come to schools, so this is similarly the biggest shift of how schools have had to act is to adjust for this newfound world. And it's hard for me to say exactly what happened before 2019 because I wasn't in it. But my guess and understanding is that the schools mostly tried to ignore it and kind of keep their head in the sand through probably the 2010s, most of them. In the 2000s, it was all manageable. You see the numbers in the chart; it wasn't gaining, but like
Mhm.
as it kept, it was a slow and steady increase. I think these schools basically just tried to be like, okay, like 'cause these schools have flexibility, especially privates. And he's like, okay, well, there's 5% more CS kids this year. There's 12% this year. And I think they
Yeah.
got caught off guard. And that was probably around like 2016. And a previous episode we did recently was the strategic positioning episode. I think that's probably when they really realized like this is a real problem.
Mhm.
That I think the first line of defense of these schools started being more picky about which computer scientists that they want to accept. And this was and that's still the case. Well, that led to students basically lying on their applications and saying that they're farmers or philosophers or whatever and getting in.
Okay, yeah.
And I think that was probably the first battle that I was not privy to. Like I showed up probably right as that was ending, I suppose. I think in the last like when I first showed up though, that was kind of the game. It was like and that my results dictated that from 2019, 2020, 2021. It was very difficult for students to get into computer science. And there
Hmm.
certainly was a fear there. Um, the ironic part is I think that fear is just as consistent as it ever was. Probably even more so. I no longer fear it quite as much. I guess I'll get to why, but this is also where we have to break it down schools into privates versus publics because that's
Okay.
basically they've handled it differently. Private schools, I think they basically ignored it as long as they could, only until they realized it was a big problem. Then they went on to accept a new future, I guess, in a way
Mhm.
that is a lot easier for a private school to do. My this is I think I put hat in the yeah I think I put hat in the
Oh
in the
my gosh,
outline.
hat's coming out.
I know it's the dude just trust me bro hat. I truly believe that these schools are it's if you Google it's not really there, but these schools are basically slowly but surely adding more computers, they're adding
Yeah.
more chairs, the privates, and it may or may not be at the sake of other majors, but probably is because that's another
Mhm.
aspect of computer science being a virus is that as more students want computer science, that is sapping away from their math departments, from their English
Yes.
departments at a little bit steady rate, which hasn't really happened before. Like that's part of it is like the history of college admissions is that things were pretty stable. So to have this new major not just everyone wants it, but people don't want to be doing. You only still only have 2,000 students at your school. That's another aspect they're dealing with. And my guess is they
Yeah.
mostly just they've probably had to cut some corners on other departments. If there's few math is the one that always comes to mind. Is like what percent of mathematicians kids applying math in 1990 are now applying computer science? Probably a pretty gosh darn good
Oh,
amount.
yeah. Mhm.
So like I don't know what you do except slowly but surely alter the budget so there's less for math because no one cares, and then move that to CS. And I think that's pretty much what they've done, and or just bought their way out of the problem. They've just spent more money on computer science and they've realized like whatever. But that
Right.
um so that's the one. But then you get into state schools. State schools have a much harder problem because state budgets are set in stone like years in advance.
Mhm.
So that's where it's interesting is like there's basically each state school has had to kind of make their own strategy, and pretty much all of them at this point they lock you into your major.
Yeah.
yeah, like that was one of the first lines of defense because they don't have the luxury of just putting more money into the CS department. They also it's much more difficult for them to just take money from other departments because they can't. Like it's all state funded. So what do you do?
Okay,
So
yeah, that's true.
a lot of them held like the big one they've all done is lock in your major. And if you apply to state schools for computer science, it almost certainly is harder to get in general because they don't have the slots. But even if you do, but if you what you can't do is apply something else and then switch
Mhm.
in. What's probably more interesting is different schools, different state schools have played like different games. And I have Purdue, Michigan, Georgia Tech, lower tier UCs like Riverside, Merced, maybe like Davis and Santa Barbara area, as well as like the UT Austin network. They have reorganized funds to become STEM mills, is the only way I can describe it. That I believe that these schools essentially, it's not that hard to get into CS, and my students hit over and over and over again. And these schools, especially like Purdue and Georgia Tech, are known as like STEM state school academies
Yeah.
now in a way that they literally couldn't have been 25 years ago because it wasn't the same world. Um, I will say that I believe the schools that have gotten that option have been rewarded for their decision making. I don't know if it's ask me again in 10 years when CS maybe isn't quite the same, but Purdue, Michigan, Georgia Tech, and the lower tier UCs have all greatly benefited from such thought process. Like, okay, we'll just and probably we'll just slash a bunch of funding for a bunch of other departments and just be CS guys or engineer. And they have benefited at least in the last decade heavily from it.
Mhm.
UW Seattle is one of my favorite schools in the nation because it lets in 2% of students out of state for CS. And
What?
I feel like as a I want to start having more of our students, like our really strong students, apply to UW Seattle for CS to see what happens because I'm
Yeah,
really
yeah.
curious. Like they never want to, but I think I'm gonna start adding that, making them because I want to see what happens and like maybe we'll pay for
Totally.
yeah. But and I didn't really that seemed like that seemed like cap like because people were like oh Purdue and Michigan they're so hard to get in like no they're not Purdue Michigan Georgia Tech they're not that hard to get in for CS from any state in the country. I have receipts. You have receipts.
Mhm.
You know what I'm talking about. Sorry, guys. Like that's put that on TikTok. If you want to yell at me about being an
Oh,
idiot, sorry,
no.
sorry. Like I have receipts. It's not that hard to get into CS from Mass if you have 4.0 and good test scores and do it right. But then there's like Berkeley and UCLA. These two were kind of like, especially Berkeley was like holding out, and like that Berkeley was the huge like can't switch in your major, and I feel like they're like a past war was Berkeley really not wanting to bend the knee like in the way they
Okay.
were. And once but like they instead have basically taken strats from the other two departments where they are more like CS heavy, and also they do it's really, really hard to get into Berkeley, UCLA from out of state, you know,
Right.
in general, that's the big shift, but I think computer science is 10 times. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if out of state CS for Berkeley, UCLA is not that different than UW Seattle. Like, it's not feasible in a way that, yeah, but it's like every school's had to be different, and just the fact that you can see how complicated this is, like every school, like I'm talking about, is like had their own strategy. That's because it's a virus, and like it's like bordering
Yeah.
on a like it has been a war to fight the virus off, and every school has had to play it
Mhm.
differently. The good news is you can get into CS, you can get into top schools for CS. Like
It's
that's the
true.
very good news. I again have receipts. That has probably been just in like the first 3 years of my career, I was both like terrified. I bought into the fear hyping, and as well as like other consultants were like, yeah, no one gets in for CS top schools. It's a nightmare. To the point where I had some theory that it was only like recruited athletes that were doing CS because as I would joke, like if you were a tennis player and you got into Stanford, what major would you do at Stanford?
Right.
No, I just my this is very personal. Just the results I've had with excellent students applying CS to elite top 10, top 20 universities. Is the results have been there's two reasons for it. I guess one is that yeah, especially private schools, but publics too, is like the virus has spread to the point where what comes after a pandemic? It's an endemic, right? Like we're in the endemic
Yes.
period of the CS virus, I would
It's just
say.
everywhere.
It's everywhere, yeah, and you can make whatever connection you want to make about what's endemic, about endemic virus feels like, but it's a lot of burned out people that are like, okay, this is the new normal,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
like yeah, like the vaccines work well enough. I get, you get the idea. Like
Mhm.
you can do your own do your own bit about viruses again. But you can imagine why I kept bringing this up around like 21, 20, like why this is what the rant
Yes.
I built in the last 5 years about. Yeah, like we're in an endemic period where we're like this isn't shocking anyone anymore. It's not scaring anyone anymore. It's now just a new normal. And because of that, and it's been enough years that these schools have adapted, for like it's like there's playing defense, but then there's just adapting and changing the way you move your money or handle your process so that like it does work out pretty well. And the end result, I have been happy with it. I no longer am afraid of a student who is CS just getting into top schools, like if they have the goods in general, with through a
Right.
different other major. And the other is I got the strat. So that's going to be in part two. I have spent the last 6 years with about half my students working on CS, and I have an extremely kind of dedicated and well thought out plan of how a computer scientist with computer science gets into the top schools in the country. And that's what's coming in my next episode in a couple of these. And I think that will be just as exciting because it is different. A CS application I handle differently than any others. It's like CS, pre-med, and finance are the three that like I handle very differently than the rest. And the CS one is by far the one I have the most practice on. So I'm excited to bring that next time. Sound good, Michelle?
Sounds good. This has been
Okay,
super
that was fun.
interesting. Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. See you next time.
See ya.
I am now taking on students for the 2025-26 college admissions season. If you are a current junior who's looking for help specifically with their college application and essays, you should check out my website. It's collegewithmattie.com, and there you can see my services, my blog with other written posts, as well as book out a free consultation where you get a chance to chat with me and see how I might be able to help. Looking forward to meeting with you.